Regulation H is officially set to begin within a week, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the top performing cores that have emerged so far. Kicking this list off, we're going to start with Pelipper and Archaludon, which feels like the natural place to start. It seems to be the talk of the town right now. How do we beat Pelipper Archaludon? How do we play Pelipper Archaludon? How do we close out this core? And we're going to start with just the 2-mon core of Pelipper Archaludon. I'll probably showcase some examples of other mons you can add to this team later on as well. But to start, we're starting with Pelipper. It gets access to Drizzle. And Pelipper is nothing really new in these formats. It saw some use in Regulation G as well, as that Rain Setter had access to the Hurricane, to the Weather Ball. And much of that is still the same, right? You're still going to see Hurricane. You're still going to see Weather Ball. You're probably still going to see some combination of Tailwind. Helping Hand is probably less common, but you still might see it. Wide Guard is still very good. Protect is still very good, right? And all these moves just help make Archaludon that much stronger because you get the access to Electro Shot. You get access to big moves like Draco Meteor or Dragon Pulse, depending on what Dragon move you want. Flash Cannon is very strong. And then if you have Stamina, you can actually have the secondary option of going Body Press. And now you're a threat on multiple ends. And that, I think, is what the scariest part about Archaludon is this stamina ability with Body Press on top of the Electro Shot, the Draco Meteor, the Flash Cannon, right? Because normally what you want to do here is you want to just snarl down the Electro Shot. But if you snarl down the Electro Shot, you're now boosting its defenses with the stamina. And if you're boosting its defenses, all of a sudden Body Press becomes a problem. So beating this core becomes very, very difficult. I'll have a video on that in a couple days, hopefully. But more so importantly, right now, Electro Shot is a broken move in Rain. For those of you that do not know what it does, basically in Rain, you no longer need to take that turn to charge. So on the first turn, you charge up and you get a special attack boost. On the second turn, you actually launch the attack. But in Rain, you don't need to have that charge, and it just becomes deadly when paired beside Pelipper. And you know what wants to stop an Electro Shot? A Grass type, a Ground type. Right? Well, Pelipper is just here. It's going to hit those grass and ground types with a Hurricane or a Weather Ball, respectively. And all of a sudden, now you have a very strong core that's very difficult to take down. Pelipper in Rain hits surprisingly hard. Archaludon, once it gets to +1, hits ridiculously hard. And like I said, if you try to slow it down, Body Press also is a problem as well. Now, you're normally seeing this with Assault Vest is making this incredibly difficult to take down. It has ridiculous stats. You fix its special defense with the Assault Vest, and then you just send attacks, and it's a very, very strong core. Now, normally you see these cores paired with stuff like Basculegion, and you see them paired with Amoonguss. That is not how you type, Ryan. And you see them paired with Amoonguss, right? Sometimes we see Incineroar, sometimes we see Rillaboom. There's a lot going on right now, and I'm really just focusing on the 2-mon cores right now. But you do see Basculegion an awful lot, and you get Swift Swim here. You tend to see a Choice Band just to take advantage and get full damage out. You Terra Water, and you send Wave Crash into Rain. We've seen it before with Palafin. You're sending Wave Crashes in Rain. This time with a Choice Band, it's going to add up. It is going to hurt. Right? And it's just that extra element that all of a sudden you now need to stop, right? You have the ability to go fast, and if everything else on the team happens to die, you now have access to Last Respects as well. And Last Respects, you get up to, I believe it's base 200 power once all the other 3 Pokemon on your team are gone. So you drop in 200 base power Ghost type moves with a Choice Band, it's going to hurt. If you can position this properly, Basculegion goes crazy in this format, right? It also just is very nice touch for the Archaludon Pelipper because Archaludon does not like those fighting types, and Basculegion just tidies that up. It's a very nice switch and very good synergy there. And then Amoonguss is just going to be Amoonguss. It's the defensive backbone on this core more often than not. Once again, just your general regenerator, your Pollen Puff just to keep healing this Archaludon up, right? That's one way that people like to take Archaludon down, is just kind of have something that can maybe sit in front of it and then slowly whittle it down with like those special attacks, because even with the Assault Vest, you're going to take some hits. And there's not a lot of crazy offensive power in this format right now. So we don't have the, I'm just going to drop this Archaludon through its Assault Vest. Now you can, but it's not the easiest thing to do. So Archaludon's generally able to take a couple hits. And if you're able to take a couple hits, Amoonguss makes a lot more sense because you just Pollen Puff things back up. And you heal up your Archaludon, and all of a sudden, all that work that you did to chip down the Archaludon is just useless, and Archaludon reigns supreme. But this is a really solid core right now if you are looking to just play some Rain, have some really good control of the board state. This is a very, very strong core. Moving on to core number 2 is going to be everybody else's fan favorite in the format, aka Gholdengo. Now, generally speaking, this core consists of Gholdengo plus a Tailwind user. There's a few other cores with Gholdengo as well, like some Gholdengo balance, like some Clefairy, some Follow Me stuff as well. But as a whole, what I'm seeing emerging on the top of these Gholdengo builds is actually the Tailwind. So Gholdengo Tailwind is what we're going to focus on today. Obviously, this time, for the sake of the video, I'm going to put Talonflame. I think Talonflame is the front runner for Gholdengo teams, just because it's able to do some cool things as well, like Taunt. You also get Brave Bird as well, which hits things pretty good as well. So you get Will-O-Wisp, which is cool for the King Gambit mode, because the King Gambit's a problem for Gholdengo. So throwing Will-O-Wisp on here kind of scares that King Gambit. Now, I don't think it's enough to really deter them, but King Gambit definitely does not appreciate getting Will-O-Wisp down by a Talonflame. So that's definitely something to consider when you picking your Tailwind setter for this core. But other than that, like I said, it's just Tailwind, Taunt, and Brave Bird. I've seen a few with Flare Blitz over like Taunt or a Will-O-Wisp, but I think Taunt and Will-O-Wisp are the most consistent you can run on a Talonflame. Generally, you're going to see like a Sharp Beak or I've seen Life Orb, I've seen Covert Cloak. There's tons of options that you can put on a Talonflame. Generally tends to be Terra Ghost or Grass. I've seen a couple grasses. But overall, Talonflame, very good Tailwind setter once it's at full HP, because you walk in, you're at full HP, you're fast like crazy, right? I think you're 194, or no, 196, right? 195, excuse me. You would go Jolly, but 196, 5, and you do a lot with 195, right? Not a lot is breaking your Gale Wings before you're able to get a Tailwind up. And because of that, you're going to get Tailwind up more often than not. It's a very strong priority Tailwind setter. Like I said, you get access to Taunt, you get access to Will-O-Wisp. And what I like about it is you can Taunt and Will-O-Wisp the Dark types, unlike something like a Whimsicott, where you can't Encore, or you can't use your Prankster moves against those Dark types. And because of that, I don't know, Talonflame feels a little bit better, especially versus like the Trick Room, where if they have like Indeedee, and you can't taunt the Trick Room setter because you're a Prankster, and the Psychic Terrain is stopping that. But here, with Talonflame, only your Flying type moves are Prankster or boosted, so Taunt and Will-O-Wisp can still go off and stuff like Psychic Terrain, which is very, very strong. And then, of course, Gholdengo, there's a couple options here. You can go set up with the Nasty Plot, and then probably a defensive Terra, and then once you get a Nasty Plot up, then you come in, you click Tailwind, and you go Make It Rain, and you just quite literally make it rain and try to profit off of that, right? Then you also just have Shadow Ball, which is very, very good coverage right now. Being immune to every status move in the game is incredible. And then, like I said, you can either go Choice Specs, you can go Leftovers to set up if you want to. There's tons of options for what you want to do with Gholdengo here. And this core is very, very open to how you want to close it out. There are tons of options. Like I said, you can go Follow Me, you can go Redirector. I've seen a lot of Ursaluna Blood Moon actually. Just paired with this fast Ursaluna Blood Moon, it's a very good answer to the Archaludons. You can chunk it very, very well with the Life Orb boosted Earth powers here. And then we all know what Ursaluna Blood Moon at this point, and that is with the big Blood Moon at base 140 and the big Hyper Voices that just hit ghost types. There's really no switch into them. And just having those options is really, really incredible here. You generally go Terra Normal here. But then other than that, the core is wide open on how you choose to close it out. I've seen a couple of Moonguses, I've seen some Rillabooms, seen some Incineroars, but there are tons of options and ways to close this out. You probably want a very strong water type here as well. What that water type is, I mean, I haven't really seen much. I'm sure you could probably get away with like an Adaptability Basculegion. Gastron's kind of meh right now. Gyarados could be cool if you're really looking for Intimidate. I think Gyarados is super slept on. Long story short, there's a lot of leeway for these next few slots. I do think a water type is cool. Tauros Aqua or Tauros Water is pretty cool as well. Either way, like I said, there's a lot of leeway for these last few options. I'm really looking forward to seeing how these Gholdengo Talonflame cores adapt and learn and grow with the meta, because I think, like I said, there's a lot of room, and I'm curious to see how that holds up. King Gambit Rillaboom is going to be next on our list. This one is probably more of a core of 3 or 4, but we're going to break it down to just slow it down to King Gambit Rillaboom, because I think the two of them together are incredibly strong. The core is nothing new. Back in the old formats, I believe it was Regulation was it Regulation F, where it was the Rillaboom Salamence King Gambit core that came around. I believe it was Eric Rios that made that team. So there's a lot of options here, right? This core is not necessarily new, but it is incredibly, incredibly strong. Generally, you're going to see it paired now. You're going to close this off with a fire type and a water type. I'll get into those in a bit. But King Gambit is incredibly strong right now. Generally speaking, you're going to be running black glasses, as at least right now. I do think Assault Vest is a very valid option as well for King Gambit. But right now, a lot of it, and what makes this go, is you have Fake Out Pressure, and King Gambit does not generally die to one hit. And if it does die to one hit, you're going to be able to fake that user out with your Rillaboom. And then King Gambit's just going to be a free turn to go ahead and click this Swords Dance. And then you pair that with just double Dark move more often than not with Kowtow, Cleave, and Sucker Punch. And once you get to +2, you can go Terra Dark if you really want to just send damage. You Terra Dark, you send +2 Kowtow Cleaves, you send +2 Sucker Punches. And there's not a lot of Pokemon in the format that actually appreciate taking this hit. A lot of them will just drop. You still remember you have a Rillaboom, you're still getting Grassy Terrain recovery. Your Earthquakes aren't going to be doing as much damage to you either. Any ground type that would normally want to be on the field no longer wants to be on the field because Rillaboom is here. And generally speaking, if you're going with the setup King Gambit, this becomes an Assault Vest on your Rillaboom. And it's just really, really good into these Psy Spam cores, which we will get into in a bit. But Woodhammer U-Turn, Grassy Glide, right? I'm not going to build this out, but regardless, this is what you're seeing, right? Then to Fake Out, like I've talked about before. But as a whole, these two are incredibly strong. They function really, really well together. And it's that nice, it's a balanced core that has the ability to set up, and I really, really like that about these two. And like I said before, you tend to see a water type, you tend to see a fire type, and this on its own is a ridiculously strong core. You got your fire, water, grass, you got your fairy, steel. You could probably throw a dragon on one of the last two. We've seen a big uptick in this usage as of late, and Primarina is very strong. You got a lot of options here as well. You can go with something like a liquid well, you're obviously going to go Liquid Voice, but you can go with like Throat Spray. You can go with, I think, Citrus Berry, Leftovers, Calm Mind is cool as well. You can do just Choice Specs, but I think the big thing here is you have access to Haze. And now you can run Choice Specs Haze. It's a little weird to position at times, but you can run it. And as a whole, just Primarina Haze, you get Hyper Voice more often than not. And this just really closes out the core, right? Moonblast feels incredible in this format. It's just a really strong core. Volcarona likes to set up with Quiver Dance, help wall out some of those Archaludons, because that's probably one of your best ways to outpace Archaludon, is you start setting up your Volcarona, and then they have difficulty actually taking you down. You get out of the rain, you just start sending Fiery Dances or Heat Waves into the Archaludon. And as a whole, Body Press doesn't really scare you either because you're a bug type. You can also burn them with the Flame Body, so as a whole, it's a very strong core. But the bulk of this core, I think, right now is Rillaboom, King Gambit, and then a Water and a Fire type. It does not need to be Primarina. It does not need to be Volcarona. I've seen Tauros been tested a lot as well. So, like, I've actually seen, like, Primarina dropped, and then they've gone, like, Sylveon and Water Tauros, right? They've split up the Water type, right? So, rather than having it as one slot, they now have it as two, which is another very strong way to approach this core. Either way, like I said, I think King Gambit, Rillaboom, this is kind of where the balanced core is in the format right now. This is where we're at, and I think it's curious. I'm curious to see how it actually closes out, because like I said, there's a ton of options, right? And it's so early in the format, because I was reluctant to make this video where I was like, you know, a lot of these cores are 2-mon cores, but I still think there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of good that we can get out of just talking about 2-mon cores, even if it's a 3rd-mon. But I think as a whole, there's a lot to talk about it, right? Like, it's weird when you talk about like a whole team. It's normal when you talk about a whole team. You know, these are the teams, cores of 4, cores of 5, right? But we don't have that yet. So having cores of 2, I still think it's still useful. So hopefully you guys are getting something from this video. But as a whole, Rillaboom, King Gambit, probably plus a Water or a Fire type, is probably where this core is heading. And I'm very curious to see how far it goes into the metagame. Indeedy Hatterene. I said it was going to be mentioned, so here we are. This is just one of those Trick Room cores, guys. If you guys were watching the Trick Room video, I did talk a lot more about it there, so I'm probably going to go a little bit quicker through this, but it did just win a 430-person Regulation H tournament in the Trainer School, so there's definitely something to talk about here. It is a very strong core, and generally speaking, it always has been, right? You've got your Psychic Terrain or your Psychic Surge from the Indeedee. Hatterene means Hatterene can no longer get faked out or priority moved. And then you have access to Magic Bounce. So now you can't get faked out, priority moved, or taunted, or spored. And as a whole, it is a really, really strong combination beside each other. Just an easy way to get Trick Room up more often than not. And the games against Ndidi Hatterene, or the games with Ndidi Hatterene for you, is when you're playing Ndidi Hatterene, it is I'm gonna get into Trick Room pretty much almost all the time. There are ways they can stop it, but for the most part, you're getting into Trick Room. How do I capitalize on those turns of Trick Room? If you're playing against it, rather than stopping Trick Room, which once again you still can do, but more often than not, it's how do I position myself to survive the 4 turns of Trick Room and win after that, right? So it's a very nice way to get Trick Room up onto the board. There are a lot of good options to pair with these two as well. You're scared of big spread moves? Throw Wide Guard in there, aka Gallade, which tends to be the common core here as well. You want a big Trick Room sweeper, you have Torkoal. You want a big Trick Room sweeper, you have Ursaluna. Both of the Ursalunas work. I think we're seeing this one a little bit more. We have stuff like Araquanid. We have Lilligant if you want like a more faster option as well. So now instead of just hard forcing Trick Room, you can force a Torkoal Lilligant lead and pressure with stuff like Sleep Powder, Leaf Blade. Leaf Blade? Is Leaf Blade the move? I know Leaf Blade is a move, but I think you get Solar Blade, right? You can go Leaf Blade, you can go Solar Blade as well as your fire move, as your grass move. Sorry, if you're into Sun, because you get to charge for free, which is pretty cool. Then you get access to stuff like Close Combat is pretty good as well, but Torkoal is perfect on this team. I love how I just built out like a pretty common Trick Room team. But as a whole, Trick Room, you get Drought, and this is why this core actually functions, because Ndidi Hatterene does not appreciate Rillaboom. But the ability to have a Torkoal to threaten the Rillaboom, just keep it off the field for as long as possible, or if they bring it on the field, you now have a Torkoal to switch onto the field to help deal with it. I think Torkoal is a really vital part of this team, and I think without Torkoal, it's a lot weaker of a core versus the Rillaboom stuff. So I'd say probably it ends up being a core of 3. Commit to your Trick Room, get Torkoal as one of your sweepers, probably have 1 or 2 other sweepers. But you can do a lot with this core, right? You're just going to pretty much get Trick Room up and try to capitalize on the 4 turns of Trick Room. If you play it well, you can probably get Trick Room up a second time as well. And they're just the 2 best at doing it, right? You can't taunt this one. I can just redirect if I want to. I can attack with the Hatterene and set the Trick Room up with the Ndidi now as well. There's a lot going on for Trick Room. This is where I'm starting if I'm building a Trick Room team, in my opinion. There's a few other concepts with Trick Room, which I'll get into in some honorable mentions later on. But for right now, if you're looking for a Trick Room team, this is where I would start. I would look at Ndidi Hatterene for sure. Torkoal's a very nice complement on that core as well. We talked a little bit about Volcarona earlier on some of those Rillaboom King Gambit teams, but I think as a whole, it kind of is its own concept as well, because you get Volcarona and you get a redirector. There's a lot of talk as to what this redirector should be right now. Clefable has seen play. Clefairy has seen play. Obviously stuff like Mousehold as well. But I think beside Volcarona, you want Clefable or Clefairy. And a lot of the emerging core right now is Clefable, right? You've seen Volcarona, Clefable. I've seen actually King Gambit Rillaboom on this core as well, as I was talking about earlier. So that's a pretty good core there. I think Rillaboom just slots right in here, just very naturally. But as a whole, once again, I talked a little bit of very, very briefly earlier on the King Gambit stuff, but you're able to just set up Quiver Dances with Volcarona. You're able to redirect things just to allow yourself to get Quiver Dances up more. Clefable's Unaware ability is very, very nice. So if the Archaludon is trying to like set up with Electro Shots, you don't care that it's at +4. Your Clefable takes it as if it was a neutral attack anyways, which is very, very strong. Very handy versus Dondozo. I'm a little more reluctant to use it versus Dondozo because, like, okay, yeah, Moonblast can kind of hit back, but you still only have a base 95 special attack stat. You're probably bulking this thing up for the most part. Don't actually take these numbers, but you're probably running it pretty bulky into most places anyway. So, like, Moonblast isn't really killing Dondozo, but yeah, you do sit in front of Dondozo relatively well, right? You don't really care about it too much, which is very nice, right? But as a whole, I think the concept here is you're using this as a follow me bot. And you're using it as a follow me bot plus Volcarona with setup. And the concept of Clefable is that, okay, you might not get the friend guard that Clefairy gives you, but you have Unaware. And when it's a setup mirror, and I'm going with follow me setup versus follow me setup, if I have the Unaware Mon and they have the non-Unaware Mon, generally speaking, my setup will outpace their setup. Clefable is very nice versus like the Swords Dance King Gambit, since like I said before, they don't run the Iron Head more often than not on that setup set. So you just wall it out, and you're taking damage from a neutral Kowtow Cleave every single time, even if they're at +6. So you're able to just redirect that, take the damage very, very well, keep the rest of your team alive. And just being able to set up with Volcarona, it's one of the best ways to actually outpace Archaludon right now. It's very strong into the Rillaboom King Gambit. It's very strong into the Pelipper Archaludon stuff. It's pretty good into Goldengo as well. It's a little weird with the Goldengo Tailwind stuff if they do run Talonflame, but that's 3 of the other cores that are already on this list that Volcarona is helpful for versus, right? You can make a case for Volcarona in those games. It's pretty decent into Indeedee Hatterene if you wanted to run like something like a Struggle Bug as well, but that might be a bit of a stretch. Generally speaking, you're going to see a fire move, whether that's Heat Wave or Fiery Dance. That's kind of up in the air right now as to which one's better. Generally speaking, you're going to see Giga Drain, and you're going to close this out with Protect. You're going to see some sort of either a Covert Cloak, a Citrus Berry, a Leftovers on this set of Volcarona right now. And as a whole, this is what you're seeing. This is the core, and there's a lot of room to play with, right? You can merge this with other cores, right? Maybe it's Volcarona, Clefable, Tailwind Setter, Goldengo, Rillaboom King Gambit, right? Maybe that's the core. Maybe you just merge these 3 cores that I've talked about into one, and all of a sudden you have a crazy good team, right? Like I said, it's very early in the format. There's a lot to be said going forward and how these cores actually adapt moving forward. But right now, Volcarona plus Follow Me is a very strong option. We've actually seen a little bit of Gengar on these teams as well recently. And seeing Gengar on these teams is very fun because, like, you don't see Gengar too often, right? But Gengar is pretty fast. You get Sludge Bomb and Shadow Ball, which are very good coverage moves in this metagame, especially with Rillaboom being everywhere. You get access to Will-O-Wisp if you want it, but more often than not, you're seeing Haze to help deal with those Dondozos. You can go Focus Sash. You can go probably Specs. I don't know if you can go Specs, but you probably could. But I think Focus Sash is the most common there. But as a whole, having Volcarona is very, very strong. It's a very cool option. Volcarona plus Redirector. Definitely a cool core if you're looking to try and play that setup style game. Definitely try this one out. Okay, we're going to jump into the honorable mentions, and this is Dondozo, Tatsugiri, Glimmora. And my main concern with Dondozo, Tatsugiri, Glimmora, because this could have very easily been one of the main cores that I had talked about today. I left it as an honorable mention just because I feel every team right now is building ways to deal with Dondozo, right? A lot of those cores that I had mentioned, I was like, oh, Primarina can run Haze. Gengar can run Haze, right? Everything just felt like they kind of have answers to Dondozo. So it's a little bit pushed down the list, but it's still a very strong core because a lot of the times, like, the concept here is you're going to lead Glimmora, get big damage up, or play it slow, depending on how you want to play your Glimmora. You can play it offensive with, like, the Power Herb Meteor Beam stuff and just put on big damage, or you can play it nice and defensive with like an Assault Vest or a Focus Sash and just use this Toxic Debris, use Mortal Spin, kind of poison everything, and then bring your Dondozo in afterwards, and you get a lot of value out of that, right? So that's a very strong core on its own, and it just feels like the problem now, though, is, like I said, the Dondozo part feels less good. Just because, like I said, there's a lot of Haze. There's a lot of anti-Dondozo stuff going around right now. Doesn't make Dondozo bad, but as long as you just need to know what those answers are to you, and you need to know how to find ways to take them down, right? Obviously, if Primarina is becoming a problem, maybe you can find a way to bait something else on their team to terrestrialize, and then you can go like Terra Grass, Terra Blast on Dondozo, right? So now Primarina can no longer haze you. So that's one way to check, right? That's what I like about Dondozo. There's a lot of ways, like there's a lot of counterplay to it, but there's also counterplay to the counterplay with your Dondozo. And I think as a whole, it makes for some interesting sets and some interesting things to talk about. I don't want to spend too much time on the honorable mentions, but Dondozo, Tatsugiri, Glimmora is a very strong core right now. Moving on, as I said before with the Indeedee Hatterene was the best Trick Room core, here is the other Trick Room core that I think has a ton of potential that is being super slept on right now, and this is Porygon 2 Ursaluna. It saw a little bit of play earlier in a previous form. Once again, I'm shaky on these regulation letters, but as a whole, I remember when Porygon 2 was just after the DLC dropped. at one point. But anyways, Porygon 2, Ursaluna, and I think even Hatterene can be made on this core. Just like I said, Hatterene is an incredible Trick Room setter with Magic Bounce. And then Porygon 2 is just the bulky version of a Trick Room setter. If you want a bulky Trick Room setter, you can run Porygon 2. It will be bulky. You run Eviolite, and you just tank a lot of hits, and you get Trick Room up. You pair this with something like Ursaluna, and then Ursaluna just goes off with its Flame Orb. And you get to do a lot with this core, right? Like you can just click Headlong Rush. You can click Earthquake if you really wanted to. You can maybe even go, like, if you really wanted to, you can go Terra Flying maybe on the Hatterene or the Porygon. And then Ursaluna can just start spamming Earthquake. And it's just so many things that you can do with this, right? You have double normal type with Porygon 2 Ursaluna, which helps versus the Mouse Hold Annihilate, which, yes, guys, is coming up. That is the next core that I'm talking about. But as a whole, the double normal type is nice because no matter how many times they boost their Rage Fist can't hit you. You can EV to live the Drain Punches. That's not a really big issue. And because of that, it feels like a very strong option, right? You're going to get Trick Room up versus that Mouse Hold Annihilate core. Maybe not. I guess it depends if they have Taunt or not, right? If they taunt the Porygon 2. But if they're taunting the Porygon 2, they're not setting up the Annihilate. Either way, I feel like this has potential. I think the double normal type can do something into the Mouse Hold Annihilate stuff. I feel like, yes, there's still some 50-50s, obviously, but as a whole, I think you can do a lot with the double core here on Trick Room. I think you can actually just put this on a balanced team almost as well. Like, you can go Porygon 2 Ursaluna, and then just close it out with, like, a normal balanced team. Like, you can go Rillaboom. You can maybe go Instant if you wanted to. Once again, you could even close this out maybe now with like a Goldengo and a Tailwind option if you wanted to, or a Rillaboom King Gambit, right? There's a lot of options. Pelipper Archalet. You know what? Put Pelipper Archalet on this team. Why not? I don't see a reason why you wouldn't, right? Either way, I think the core is very, very strong with the Porygon 2 and the Ursaluna. So there's something to keep in mind as well. Curious to see if that starts creeping into the meta a bit more. Everybody's either favorite core or most hated core here, Mouse Hold Annihilate. And Mouse Hold Annihilate started very, very strong in the regulation. When the regulation first dropped, it was announced. They were like, okay, Mouse Hold Annihilate's going to be crazy. It's going to be everywhere. And it was. It won a couple early tournaments. It had a very strong showing. And it's just forcing 50-50s, right? Friend Guard is an incredible ability. You tend to run safety goggles on the mouse, so I don't know why my mind was blanking, right, to get around the Amoonguss stuff. And then you beat up, and the concept here is you get to click beat up into your Annihilate, right? And because you have Defiant, they can't really intimidate you. Rage Fist is going to get boosted by each hit from that beat up, and it just sets up so fast and can be so overwhelming to play if you are not prepared for it. But a lot of people obviously try to click follow me versus it, but that's where taunt on the mouse comes in. And then all of a sudden the ape gets set up. Well, now I need to hit the ape, but nope, I have follow me on my mouse hold, right? There's a lot going on with the mouse hold. You have a ghost type on the Annihilate. You tend to Terra Ghost the mouse hold, and that way you have an answer to fake out pressure there as well. It's a core that has a lot. It can set up on its own. It can do a huge amount of damage if your opponent is unprepared for it. And, you know, worst case scenario, you don't get the beat up off into your Annihilate. You still have bulk up, you can still set your Annihilate up, and you can still over time do damage because you're a pretty bulky piece with Annihilate, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to have the mouse hold hitting into the ape. You can afford to take a few hits from your opponent with Annihilate. You will survive them more often than not. And then all of a sudden your Rage Fist gets boosted anyways. You Drain Punch, you get your health right back. It's a very strong core. I think if you've been playing this game since Regulation A, we've seen this core do well. We know what this core does. And we're starting to see a little bit more redirection versus it. We're starting to see a little bit more counterplay to it as well, which is why it's kind of fallen into my honorable mentions. I have no clue how this video became 30 minutes. But these are some of the top cores in Regulation H right now. If you guys do enjoy this type of content, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. And of course, I really do appreciate it. But with that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you all in a future video.